Hello, welcome to Video Game Animation Study. This channel studies animation in video games, and to kick off 2020, we're going to look at the 5 fundamentals of video game animation in this new mini-series. This episode is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to build your online presence. The actual medium of animation has been around for well over 100 years. The first use of CGI in animation could be attributed to a number of pieces dating back to the 70s, 60s, and even 50s. The first use of stop-motion and hand-drawn animation stems to the early 1900s. And even the zoetrope and associated devices date back to the 1800s. But video game animation is still relatively new and evolving all the time. Techniques and processes are always dictated by the limitations of the host technology, which is why we had limited frame use during the 8-bit era of video games, for example. And as techniques and processes are enhanced and refined, so too are the outcomes. The 12 principles of animation are the animator's toolkit for creating convincing, coherent, and appealing movement. My buddy Dan has begun this study within video games over on his channel, so you should definitely check that out. And there's lots of information on the 12 principles out there generally. And while all animation generally adheres to most of these rules, video game animation is a little different. No longer is a story told in a linear fashion beyond your control. Video games offer the opportunity to play the story at your own pace, in your own order, and so the visual identity of the medium must adapt. Animated storytelling for the most part of the 20th century followed the format of traditional film storytelling. Actions are planned ahead, your camera must consider the clarity of your storytelling, etc. But as the confines of linearity are expanded, so are the principles that shape them. A camera in a 3D game no longer works how it would in a TV or a film. It's free roaming as opposed to fixed or planned. Since the popularity of the video game industry has grown, animators and developers have always had in their minds their own set of rules for animating in games. For instance, there's an art to making a character loop nicely in their idle pose, something you probably wouldn't worry too much about in a TV series or a film. You might re-watch your favourite animated film over and over, but it'll never match the amount of times you might punch in Street Fighter over and over. So you have to think about how elegant and efficient your animation is going to look, and from all angles too. And now, for the first time, all these unspoken rules and guides are coming together in the same way the 12 principles did in The Illusion of Life. Jonathan Cooper is the author of the book Game Anim, Video Game Animation Explained, and from his experience animating and leading on games such as Uncharted, Mass Effect, Assassin's Creed, and The Last of Us, he has collated many modern techniques and practices over the past 20 years into a single idea, which complements the 12 principles, which he has termed the 5 fundamentals of video game animation. This introductory episode will act as an overview of these fundamentals, with following episodes going into more detail on each. Firstly, let's look at feel. The difference between a game and a film is the interactivity. Jonathan Cooper posits that an animator should relinquish authorship of an animation, lest to interfere with the interactivity. This means that no matter how good you want an animation to look for a move, you should be prepared to scrap some or all of it for the sake of better control. The fine balance you have to perfect is the difference between a character feeling sluggish and a character feeling unrealistic. Some characters might take a while to turn on the spot, while some might flip instantly with no inertia. This affects how the character feels to play. A big punch and a small punch will feel different. Turning a corner fast or slowly will feel different as well. This is generally what feel is. Next, it's fluidity. Fluidity, which I've touched upon briefly before, is how smoothly and coherently different actions blend together. It is the art of transition, removing and reducing as best you can, as Jonathan puts it, any unsightly movements between actions that might give away the magic. It's much easier to achieve this with programmable maths in a 3D rig than it is with separate sprite animations in a 2D game. Going from idle to run, for example, could look like this, or it could look like this. One of them is easier on the eye and likely to immerse you more, but be careful you don't ruin the feel. This is fluidity. Let's look at readability. This is how your action reads on screen and is a close relative to the classic staging principle. While you may have control of your character, the camera in many cases is independent and will fly around at all sorts of angles. So a video game animator's job, more so in 3D games, is to ensure an action is identifiable and clear from any angle. You have to ensure your action is interesting and doesn't just move in one particular direction, but give it some texture by having varying movements in different directions at once. This is generally what readability is. And now context. This relates to where and how an animation will be used in your game. Quite often, an animator won't know when an animation will be used by a character or player, or multiple characters, unless it's a very specific animation for a scene or character. For instance, all 3 characters in GTA 5 generally have the exact same movement, as far as I can tell. There's no real distinction between their personalities, even though they're all quite different. This is different to, say, Batman in the Arkham games. You're going to be controlling only Batman, so you can have specific nuances and quirks that will only apply to Batman. NPCs will often have animation that's not going to be seen as much when compared to the player character, so this is something to consider when designing an action for a character. You have to consider how close to the game camera that a character will be as well, with far away moves given a bit more exaggeration to make them more readable, and more subtle movements restrained for cutscenes. And lastly, elegance. As the name suggests, this is how elegant animations will look when working together. This is an idea that applies to design in general and not just a game animation, but in this case it relates to the efficiency of an action and the animation systems in place that bring different animations together. This can relate to the overall production of the game and how this will affect workflow later in the project, especially when you need to change something easily. Elegance can be about thinking smart. Jonathan gives an example where if your character has to interact with a lot of objects in the game, then making the objects all a similar size will allow you to make a more generic animation to save cost on lots of different animations. However, if your game is about interacting with different objects, then it might be wise to invest a little more into unique actions for varying objects. Or if you have an action for opening a door, can this be adapted for other things with a little tweaking to the animation? It's all about being clever and efficient, and avoiding having your workload being bloated by unnecessary animations. This will depend entirely on the content, substance and budget of your game though. And this is generally what elegance is. And those are the 5 fundamentals. They're there to complement the original 12 principles to help shine a new light on animation techniques that require a different line of thinking in video game production. The following 5 episodes to this one will go into more detail on each of these fundamentals, so do the thing if you want to be in the loop. You can buy Jonathan Cooper's book Game Anim, which is out now. You can check out his Twitter or his website. It's full of lots of different things to do with animation in the video game industry. I thoroughly recommend it if you're looking into getting into this career. And I also recommend this video by New Frame Plus. Oh, before I go, if you're an animator or creative mind and you're like me and your only experience of web development was editing CSS code on MySpace back in 2005, then go on right ahead and click that link in my description just there, and make the most of my Squarespace offer. I know you see a lot of it around, but having a Squarespace website is pretty neat. I mean, literally, you can organise everything so easily and you've got a whole load of tools that enable you to share things to other platforms, take donations, see your analytical data, and it looks professional, which really helps if you want to impress potential employers and such, especially if you're trying to get into a big industry. So use my link in the description to start a free trial to check Squarespace out for yourself. And when you're ready to launch, use my coupon code for 10% off your first purchase for a website or domain. Okay, thanks to my patrons, and thanks to Squarespace. Random patron shoutout, Silent Bun. Thanks, you quiet rabbit, you. Love you, bye.